Hey guys, and welcome to our show today. We have a really exciting show lined up for you. We've got a lot of new products to talk about, as well as answering your questions and talking about how to make sure you're prepared for your kickoff events. We're also going to talk about some details about our robot in 3 days, and we're going to get into some really awesome examples of running robots with RC systems. With that, let's jump right over. One of the big things that is on the website right now that just went live is 8mm Rex standoffs. You can see all of our options right here that we're going to be launching with. We have a ton of links, and we've got more links on the way. But these are the increments of 8mm that are going to be the standard. The audio is echoing. It could be the monitoring thing again. It probably is that. All right. Hopefully that solved it. We'll see. Hello. We'll hold on for a minute and make sure that fixed it, and then we'll go back at it. Yep, it's not echoing anymore. All right, weird. All right, so we've got a bunch of lengths of 8mm Rex standoffs. These come in 8mm, 16mm, 24mm, 32mm, 40mm, 43mm, and 48mm. So a ton of different length options, and really, we're starting out with the ones that make a ton of sense in GoBuilda. So the ones that have increments of 8mm up to the 48mm. We've also got a Mecanum mixer, and we've got an XT30 power distribution module. Do you want to make sure that there's no delay set up in there, I guess, technically? Oh, it's good now. I don't know what we did.
I switched inputs.
Oh, okay. Funny. Oh, I see it. That is super weird. All right. We've got a Mecanum mixer. This lets you run a standard Mecanum chassis with an RC system, which we'll talk about here again in a few minutes. And we've got the XT30 distribution panel, which should help you run. This is actually probably one of the more useful electronics parts for this that we've released today for FTC. It's a power distribution panel similar to what you probably have used in your robots in the past. Let's jump back to the 8mm Rex standoffs, because this is something that people have been really excited about for a long time. They're about what it sounds like. They're an aluminum 8mm Rex profile that's tapped on either end. These are blind tapped on either side for the longer lengths, so you should get even more strength out of your system, and they should be a really solid option. As we get more longer lengths out there, we'll have better options for running them as really light load shafts. And I'm really excited about for like mechanisms on the ends of arms, maybe intakes, and for things that need to be really light duty. But I think the big upside is that you can use them with a standard 7mm hex wrench. So if you need to really get a hold on the standoff to make sure it's tight, or to get it loose after it's already been tightened, that is a really sweet feature. Let's see, I think there's some chatter. It sounds like the audio issues are generally fixed. All right. In the YouTube chat, I need GoBuilda, not ServoCity in the UK. So we're actually the same company behind both. If you have an option for buying ServoCity in the UK, you should be able to order all the GoBuilda parts you want from ServoCity. It'll end up shipping out of the same place. So that's always a good option. Talking more about the Mecanum mixer. Robot in 3 days streams to get our RC systems up and running. We really like prototyping robots with RC systems because it allows you to really quickly get things up and running. So this lets you create the right like Mecanum code basically with your RC system without a lot of extra. So I actually have that implemented on a robot over here, and we can show you how it works. It takes a standard servo input, which is what your transmitter's receiver will output, just a standard servo PWM input, and you'll have 3 of those, basically your 3 different inputs that you need for a Mecanum drivetrain, your forward, backward, your steering, and your left and right strafing. And then it will spit out 4 outputs that you'd plug in your motor controllers to. Let's make it so the arm does not run into the table. Here we go. This is a robot that I put together. It's actually a strafer chassis with a pretty simple arm on the end. So that arm is powered by actually a 19.2-to-1, and it's got a pretty large reduction. This is the same arm that you'll see in the rookie handbook, but instead of being mounted to a 6-wheel drive, it's mounted to a strafer chassis, and it's got that same claw, which gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, that motor for the arm is run on its own motor controller, and that's just plugged into channel 3 on the transmitter. That gives us a nice option for control there, where you just move the joystick up and down to control that motor's power. Then on the right joystick, you've got steering, where you can go forward, backward, and then turn left and right, right and left. And then you've of course got strafing on your left stick. So this gives you a really sweet holonomic chassis without all of the complexity that may come from having to program it or implement a programmable controller. So this, of course, it wouldn't be legal in FTC, but it's a really great option for things outside of FTC. Maybe you're prototyping a robot, or maybe you're creating a robot for other use cases. The other cool part about that controller is the channel 1 and 2, this throttle, like forward, backward, and then steering, are the same as you'd use for a tank-style arcade mixing. So if you just have a 2-motor 6-wheel drive or a 4-motor 6-wheel drive chassis, and you want to get it mixed, the Mecanum mixer will work just as well there. That is built into the Element 6, but you may have another brand of transmitter that doesn't have that mixing built in, or you may have a pistol grip transmitter where you want to drive a 6-wheel chassis or an 8-wheel chassis or a tank chassis, and that's a really great option. Let's see, way to go getting Mecanum RC controller. I am really excited about those. Let's see here. We should also talk about our giveaway. So today we're going to give away 1 pack of each of the new lengths of 8mm X standoffs. So you get a bundle of all the lengths that we have live right now. I'll go ahead and get that started. Our keyword today is going to be !stand. It'll show it in the chat. So you'll need to be in Twitch chat to enter that giveaway, but just put the !stand in the Twitch chat as soon as you see that message pop up. Hit the right button. I didn't hit the right button. My bad. It should be up now. Didn't y'all use the mixer last RI3D? We've had a lot of versions of the Mecanum mixer. That's something that we've worked really hard to get right. And it's not been the top of our priority list for our electronics guys for about any of that time. So it does seem like it's been in development for a long time, but it's something that we've kind of not super actively been developing until recently. We wanted to make sure that that's something that, you know, we get more people request to run Mecanum chassis, especially the strafer, with their RC systems outside of FTC. The XT30 distribution block we talked about a little bit earlier. It is a 1 input and 8 output. And one of the cool parts about it is that it's got a male connector on one side that you can use to daisy chain them. There aren't many times you want one XT30 to power like 16 XT30 outputs, but that's something that you could do. You could also use this as kind of a 1:9 XT30s, because you get 9 male XT30 if you count the daisy chain specific one. The other thing that we've launched that I'm really excited about is the 12-volt control bundle. Now the 12-volt control bundle is made up of almost all parts, or all parts that we've had for a while now, but putting them together in a really easy to look at package is something that's new. The 12-volt control bundle includes a transmitter and receiver, the Element 6, a battery charger, a 12-volt battery. It includes 2 motor controllers, 2 bullet Y harnesses, an XT30 Y harness, and of course the receiver for the transmitter. Now this pack is set up to where if you had a 4-motor 6-wheel drive chassis or a 4-motor 4-wheel drive chassis, we're talking about like the Recon or the Hammerhead or the Beeline or the Outlaw, you can buy this pack and have an RC ready system. That's it. You could have those 2 SKUs in your cart. You could have your Mecanum or your 6-wheel drive or Chank chassis and the control bundle, and you'd be ready to go. It even includes like the hardware you need to mount stuff down. So I'm really excited about that, and I think for the teams that I've talked to that want to look at prototyping with RC electronics and FTC, that's going to be a really great starting point for their builds. You may need more motor controllers. A lot of times when you're prototyping a whole robot, you're going to want more than 2. For example, this robot has 5 because it's a Mecanum chassis. It needs those first 4. And so a lot of times that's going to be the thing you want to bulk up on. For those of you who aren't as familiar with RC electronics, you're not only controlling motor controllers with this transmitter and receiver, you may also plug servos directly into it, at which point it would get the 6 volts from the motor controller's BEC. Robot in 3 days this year. That's right, I've not talked about Robot in 3 days yet. Robot in 3 days this year is going to be, it's a little bit later than we've done in the past. It's going to be the 16th through the 18th. That's going to be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of September. So it's going to be the weekend following Kickoff, and we're going to have more guests this year, and it's going to be really awesome. The times are a little bit more varying than we've done in the past. We've always done 3 weekdays in the previous years, but now we're primarily on the weekend. On Friday, we're going to go from 5 to 9 p.m. On Saturday, we're going to go from 3 to 9 p.m. And on Sunday, we're going to go from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So we're really excited about that. Those are all in Central Standard Time, and we're going to have a graphic up that's going to explain that as we get a little bit closer to Robot in 3 days. We're also going to have another show that's going to be on next Friday, the day before Kickoff, and we're going to go over some preparations for Robot in 3 days. We're going to make sure that they have a strafer chassis and a Beeline that's ready to go, and we're going to go over how you make sure those chassis are ready to go and pretty solid. Specifically, the dates there are the 16th, 17th, and 18th of September. Can you talk about the dual 5-amp PWM switch versus the 1x15 motor controller? That is a great question. And I should have grabbed that because we launched that since last stream. Or maybe we launched it right before last stream. That's okay. The dual 5-amp PWM switch is pretty different than the speed controller. And we can talk about that. Before we talk about that, let's talk about specifically the motor controller because it's the more complex of the two. The 1x15 is meant as a 15-amp speed controller, and it acts basically identically to a standard RC, like brushed motor controller, but it's tuned more for robotics in that you don't have as much of an active brake like you may have on an RC car speed control, and you have just as much power in reverse as you do forward, which isn't all that common. It will take a servo PWM signal input to determine the speed that it runs the motor at, and it varies the motor speed with what we call PWM as power. Basically, it pulls whenever you're asking for less than the input voltage, you're asking it to go less than full speed, it's going to pulse that voltage that's being sent to the motor really quickly, and the amount of time that that pulsed power is on determines the average voltage the motor sees, and the lower the average voltage that the motor sees, the slower it's going to go. Now, not only will it run slower with that, it's also going to pull less power. So you overall will have kind of a chassis that's going to run slower as you decrease the servo signal you're sending it. The PWM switch has your one XT30 as an input, and then it's got two XT30 outputs. And then those outputs you can either toggle on or off. So if you plug that into the 5th channel on your transmitter, you can flip that switch all the way down, and that's going to send the PWM switch a signal that says, hey, both of these outputs should be off. You'll flip that to the center. That's going to turn both of the outputs on, or one of the outputs on, and then you flip it to the last page, the last position, and it's going to turn both of the outputs on. This is really nice for if you have multiple lights on a build and you want to control more than one light you may always want your low beams on, but you may want to turn on your high beams. And the big thing there is you don't have the direction control that you get with a 1x15, and you don't have the speed control. So it's really great at lights and other like specific components that you want to get the full battery voltage or nothing. A lot of electronics don't like that in between where you're pulsing the power. They aren't happy. But the, let's see here. But the 1x15 is definitely better on motors in most applications. How legal is the new LED light panel? On paper, I think it's legal. If you showed up to an event that I was the robot inspector at, I would call it legal. You may want to ask on the forum. We really didn't intend for it to be an FTC product. It's really designed for your outside of FTC applications, as it's honestly pretty darn bright. That would be the biggest concern I'd have about it. Technically, I don't believe that there's a brightness limitation in the game manual right now, but it's really bright to the point where if you put it right by your team numbers, you may not be able to see it. Now, there are two different ways you can power it within FTC. You can give it 12-volt power directly from your, from an XT30 distribution block or from the extra port on your expansion or control hubs, or you can control it with a motor control port. Now, to plug it into a motor control port, you'll have to make a cable. You'll have to make a JST VH to XT30, and actually either polarity or either end of XT30 will work there because it also has the same style of daisy chain connector. And at that point, you'll want to make sure only to apply the maximum amount of power and in only the polarity that it wants. As far as my quick tests showed, it didn't do any immediate damage if you pulsed the power, but you're also not affecting the brightness because of how LEDs really look for a constant current source, and at that point you are getting pretty close, is my understanding. Definitely not an electrical engineer, and I might be not super correct there. But I definitely know that it's better to run it at full power, and you don't actually have any brightness control meaningfully when you reduce the power. So if you're going to use it plugged into a motor port and you just want to turn it on or off, make sure to just turn it on or off. That's really why we like the PWM switch, and that's why those two products launched at the same time, because they are really tied together. A lot of times you're going to want to run, if you have a project like an RC system, you want to run a two output PWM switch and lights together. Let's see here. Let me check up on the YouTube chat. Yeah, I definitely see that. So Servo City specific questions, you can certainly give us a call or shoot us an email over to sales@servocity.com, and I'm sure that we can get some answers for you there, as well as like shipping costs and stuff like that. I definitely get being an international customer of robotics parts can be tough sometimes, so sorry about that. How long are these streams like this usually? We normally go for about 30 minutes to an hour. Kind of depends on how many questions we get, how many answers we're giving out. Let's see here. Should be fine. There is not a brightness limitation, only a frequency limitation. Yes, and I think it would not be ideal to flash it at a point where you would have a frequency limitation. I mean, of course, because it's against the rules, but you may also not want to do that for electrical reasons on the device. So I would say if you're going to use it in FTC, I would probably recommend either pointing it down to where nobody's going to look directly at it, because it's pretty darn bright, or having it turned on or off. The big use case I could see with it is to help augment a vision system, where you want to make sure that you have a very consistent amount of light, so you can just like flood that game element with light, look at it in a basically controlled environment, even though the rest of the lighting in the situation is not very controlled, and then turn it back off. But that does require the use of that custom connector. And honestly, that use case may be a little shoehorned. It's probably better to tune your computer vision when you get to that event, as long as you have the opportunity to. So I think that would be the best use case for it in FTC. Outside of that, there's not a ton. Since it's just one color, it doesn't give you a cool underglow. You're always going to have lights on the field, and really its primary application was, okay, I'm going to go drive my tank chassis outside at night and really kind of forage around and do some cool rock climbing, that sort of things. technically you could chain XT30, bullet to bullet, JST to VH connectors. Okay, I suppose so. I had not considered that. I don't know if I would personally want to do that, but you totally could, I think. No, because the bullets are the same polarity. Or the bullets are the same gender, I think. I would have to double check that for sure. I think the bullets are the same gender because they're both designed to plug into a motor. To be even stupider, XT30 male to XT30 male to XT30 female, bullet to bullet, JST. Yeah, I also don't think that one works. We do sell individual 3.5 mil bullets. Personally, when I made it, I took the JST-VH to bullet adapter and soldered on an XT30. XT30s are fairly reasonable to solder onto a wire, so that's something that's certainly doable. We may look at creating that adapter if that's something that a lot of people request, but I just don't see a ton of these in FTC. The rest, like definitely hit Rex standoffs, so I'm excited. I'm excited that we got these before kickoff. People have been asking for those forever, and they make a lot of sense in Go Builda. They're going to be really cool. I've got all of the lengths right there, and I've got 2 of each length on this example build. I just have a U-beam, but each pack will be 4 standoffs, just like the 6mm D standoffs are. If you guys have any questions about kickoff and stuff, certainly mention them in the chat. I'm happy to go over and kind of give any answers I have, or about anything Go Builda. That's kind of the hope of live shows, is that we can answer questions you guys have and kind of share those answers with everybody, compared to just having you call up and say, hey, let's solve this one problem I have. Talking about preparing for FTC kickoff is always something that I find really enjoyable. One of my favorite things to do, I'm actually doing it this year, and I've done it most previous seasons, even when I was a student, is to teach a session at your kickoff. A lot of kickoff events have classes, basically, where teams or mentors or individuals will go to that event and teach a session, where you can get into stuff like today, or this week next week, I'm giving a session on using motor curves to determine gear ratios and to get the most out of your motors and servos. There are stuff like that. There's stuff on outreach. I've done, we did one on fundraising and like managing a team when I was on FTC. And you can do mechanical things, programming things, all that great stuff. If you're going to a kickoff that has those, make sure to show up on time where you can go to some, because they are totally worth it, and they get you a great environment to talk with other teams that are in your region, and also to learn from those other teams who may have done it before you. If your kickoff has those and you have the opportunity to, and you have something that you're confident in, totally teach one, because it's not only great practice for judging, it's also just great life experience to have taught a class like that. And it helps other teams in your area. And if you're going to a kickoff event without them, maybe mention it to that kickoff's organizer and say, hey, next year, I really want to teach this session. I'll talk to some other teams and see if we can get together and have a class environment in this event. Should we buy parts now or wait to see game-specific parts? Like, will there be enough stock? On almost everything, like, technically, and I think somebody asked this on Discord, technically that's a hard question to answer, because we also don't know what the game is. So there may be some random part that ends up being perfect that we didn't anticipate selling really well and we don't have enough inventory on. Generally, even so, that takes a little while for people to catch on and say, oh, that's the thing I need to buy. For everything that we've anticipated selling really well this year, definitely we're pretty darn solid on. It's definitely in our best interests to keep stuff in stock, so we have bulked up on everything that we can anticipate selling really well. But you never know, there may be something that's a big surprise that you will want to buy. Personally, if it was me, I probably would hang out and see what happens, and then try to get an order pretty quick after kickoff to start prototyping. But if there's something you're pretty sure you're going to end up wanting, for example, kickoff events we've sponsored, we sent 72mm Gecko wheels. There's a pretty good chance that there's going to be something in about every game that you're going to want a grippy element to work with. And a nice part about those is that they're really flexible in how you can interact with things. For example, these are solidly mounted to an arm that's controlled by a servo. They just act like a claw here, and the fact that they're round is not a big deal. The other thing that we're looking at is you could use a round intake and kind of set the spacing there. INV4 8-Rex bearings come out of stock within 2 weeks of kickoff. I really don't think they will. I think they'll be pretty solid this year. Let's see here. Mr. Crash and YouTube, definitely please shoot us an email and we'll do our best to help that get resolved for you. You can either shoot an email to sales at servocity.com or tech@servocity.com. We're happy to help. Let's see here. Outside of teaching classes, I would say have some parts ready to where you can start prototyping really quickly, even if those parts are like cardboard that you can start making cutouts of, and put together a really quick example of how you can work with game elements. And if you can, go to a kickoff with a field, because getting that really quick, really early access to field and game elements is really cool. If you don't already, I definitely recommend looking at pre-ordering game elements or the field, even if that's just half a field, because really, especially when you have earlier events like leak meets, having access to the game really early is really nice. There are a lot of parts that I think are pretty good in most games. One of the things that we're probably going to do on Robot in 3 days is to drive a robot that's pretty similar to this, that is kind of designed to work in most games. You know, you've got an arm, it's a claw. There's a chance that you'd need to pick up something and put it somewhere else. It may need to be this high, it may need to be this high. Having a robot, even if it's a previous year's robot or something like that, where you can start interacting with game elements really early and see how they flow in a robot is really cool. I think that's really nice. Let's see here. We've got 34 individual entries in the giveaway. How many viewers do we have on Twitch? 42. Okay. If you are one of the 8 viewers who has not already put in and typed !stand in the chat to be entered to win some standoffs, you definitely should. They're really awesome, and you can get your hands on some free parts. If you do end up winning, you'll just want to shoot us an email over to marketing@gobuilda.com, and we will get some standoffs sent your way. Again, it does have to be in Twitch chat, unfortunately. And we'll give you guys a couple minutes just to make sure to get those in before we roll for our giveaway. All right. I always let's see here. One of the things, after you get some prototyping in and starting to understand what kind of robot you want to build, the thing that I always tell about everybody I can is to try to build a robot really quickly, and even if it's junk, start to prove out concepts. And one of the biggest things you can do early season with a robot is to document things really well. And the key part of that documentation for me is always, how did you determine if this idea was a good idea? So you may prototype a bunch of ideas and you end up going with one. And I think that's a really valuable thing and can help you make the right decision for your robot. But documenting and figuring out how to communicate why you picked one over the other is a really important part of the judging process, and it's something that can give you really good points for something like a Think Award or a Design or an Innovate Award. Being able to kind of quantify why one design of an FTC robot is better than another isn't only a good design practice, that's a good idea to do, it's also a really great thing to have for judging, to where you can say, hey look, we really made this decision because it was the best one for our robot, and this is why. Do you have any tips for building off the Gobuilda strafer with Rev extrusion? Rev extrusion is really easy to mix with other building systems, as is any extrusion. I'm going to turn off this transmitter so it stops beeping at me. As with any extrusion, because it's almost pattern agnostic. There's no hole pattern like you have with channel, so you can just bolt it to things. Now the big thing you'll notice with Rev extrusion and working with Gobuilda is that you've got 2 different sizes of screw. Rev Extrusion is all based around M3 hardware, and Go Build It is based around M4 hardware. So you'll almost always be able to go through a Go Build a hole with a rev screw, but you may want more support. I would take a look around and make sure you bulk up on 3mm ID washers, especially if you can get some larger OD. If you can find some 3mm ID, 8mm OD or 9mm OD washers, that's a really good option because it can give you a little more support when you're going to go bolt a rev extrusion to a Go Build It channel. All right. I think that's probably the big one. Overall, a lot of the rev components are still on an 8mm grid. So if you had an extrusion you wanted to go straight up from channel, you may still want to use some of those brackets to make everything a little bit more supported. A lot of time, that's one of the things that I have seen a lot of robots do, is have just an extrusion with one screw in the bottom go straight up, and you end up with not a very rigid connection. So making sure to add some additional bracketry to make sure that's very solid, I think is a really great thing. I really think that's the big one. If you're a rev team already and you're going to implement some Go Build A, we have rev to Go Build A pattern adapters. Those are really great for Go Build A. You can go either way. You may have a Go Build A pattern hub and a rev pattern wheel or sprocket that you want to use. We've got an adapter for that direction. You may also have a rev hub that you want to use with a Go Build A product, like a wheel or a sprocket or a gear. So there are both those pattern adapters. We also have 5mm hex bore sonic and hyper hubs, which are also really great to have to start mixing some of those shafts into other ecosystems. Let's see here. Hey Nicole, glad to have you here, even though you are a little bit late. The best place to watch these stream archives is always going to be on YouTube. They'll stick around Twitch for a little while, but if you missed the show and you still want to catch up, it'll always be over on YouTube. It looks like we've got a couple new people. We've launched some new parts that are over on the website. So if you're curious and want to get into more detail about things like the Mecanum mixer, the XT30 power distribution block, or the 8mm Rex standoffs, or the PWM switch that we talked about, or the 1x15 motor controller that we talked about, head over to gobuildit.com, and if there are questions further than that, make sure you can always shoot us an email to tech@gobuildit.com, or find me any other social media that you happen to have me on. Before we go, we'll go ahead and roll for our giveaway. So we'll close our entries, and we'll go ahead and pick the winner. Looks like the winner today is Redstoner331, who I'm pretty sure has won a giveaway before. I'm not sure. Either way, shoot us an email over to marketing@gobuildit.com with your name, Twitch name, and shipping info, and we'll get some 8mm Rex standoffs sent your way. With that, I think that's all we've got for you today. Thank you so much for joining us for today's stream, and we'll see you next week at the same time, 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern.